Hi, thanks for coming back on the show, Jens.
Thanks for having me.
Last fall, the BC, the province, made a series of announcements around conserving 30% of BC's area in a natural state. They backed it up with $1 billion, half from the province, half from the federal government. And it's really raised hopes, hasn't it?
Yes, indeed. So we had three announcements. First, the BC government with the BC Parks Foundation announced a conservation financing framework, adding up to $300 million available to increase protection. Then we heard about the nature agreement between the First Nations Leadership Council in BC, the provincial and the federal government, and lots of details about getting closer to 25% protection by 2025, and really a lot of targets and milestones related to old growth, forest protection, spotted owl, caribou habitat, and then the draft framework, the draft biodiversity and ecosystem health framework from the BC government, inviting everyone to submit comments by January 31st. So they extended the date. First was January 15th. Now we have the entire month to submit comments.
The government promises this will be the big paradigm shift from purely exploiting our landscape to protecting it. They say they are implementing the 14 recommendations of the Old Growth Strategic Review Panel back in 2020, which they said they were implementing then. But there's still lots of talking to be done first, apparently, isn't there?
Yes, and this draft framework is really promising. It goes beyond the Old Growth Strategic Review, starting with the statement of intent. The BC government commits to the conservation and management of ecosystem health and biodiversity as an overarching priority, and will formalize this priority through legislation and other enabling tools that apply to and can be accessed by all sectors. So this is a significant commitment, but of course we need implementation. It's significant because it will address forests and all other ecosystems, and it will apply to all sectors, not just forestry. But I will point out right away that while there's talk about an implementation plan, there's no proposed implementation plan, and we need the implementation plan right away when this framework gets finalized. We need timelines, most importantly, for legislation. Everything depends on legislation, and there's a lot of good things in this draft framework, but it must be translated into legislation, and we need some dates when this will happen, and most importantly, interim measures, and they should directly connect the dots with the Old Growth Strategic Review. So the review came out in 2020. We're now in 2024, and we are still looking at a huge deficit for at-risk old-growth forest. Less than half of the most at-risk old-growth forest currently has deferrals from logging, and there's no strong cross-reference to this. So we are without a new timeline or milestone date to get those deferrals in place. And we really need to see this with the final framework, implementation plan, and interim measures, getting those at-risk old-growth forests and other endangered ecosystems off limits so that we actually have time for the final steps leading to legislation. So many of the ecosystems and critical habitat of endangered species is so close to the brink, and we need these interim solutions.
This is an issue. Back in 2020, the Old Growth Panel said we needed to do a moratorium on old growth logging before implementing the discussion process, and we're doing it the other way around. And here in Nelson and the Kootenay, we're well aware of many, many logging trucks with great big fir trees going through town, all for months now. And so that logging is still going on. So there's some urgency to get on with this because we're still talking and they're still logging, aren't they?
Indeed, the logging data suggests that there's no change, pretty stable logging rates in the last few years. And the authors of the review were very clear in the OGSR report, in the introduction. Had previous old forest strategies and recommendations been fully implemented, quote, we would likely not be facing the challenges around old growth to the extent we are today. That means high risk to loss of biodiversity in many ecosystems, risk to potential economic benefits due to uncertainty and conflict, widespread lack of confidence in the system of managing forests. We really need these interim solutions to get on a different path. It's not a paradigm shift without change on the ground. Now we have lots of ingredients for solutions. Conservation, financing, that's huge. The nature agreement has a lot of details about what must happen first, but there's a lack of cross-referencing between these different documents. Specifically, the draft framework should tie directly to how the funding can now be used to support First Nations that want to defer logging in at-risk old-growth forests, protect other ecosystems.
That's a really big part of the whole framework is the reconciliation with the First Nations who have original title to huge swaths of the province. That's a key feature in the plan, isn't it?
Yes, it's very positive, really strong commitment to use this as an opportunity to implement UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And we need some specific implementation steps like the establishment of Indigenous Protected and Conserved Areas, IPCAs. That's missing in the framework. So we really have to make sure that we follow through here in BC, no resource extraction without consent, and making it a lot easier for First Nations to get the funding and get those IPCAs established to make sure that there are economic alternatives.
This is happening right now. We've got a month. The Siera Club of BC is saying right now is the time for people to show their concern. If they want to protect our beautiful ecosystem in this province, this is the time to step up, isn't it?
Absolutely, with strong emphasis on the implementation plan, timeline leading to legislation, the interim measures, particularly for at-risk old-growth forest, without reinventing the wheel. Let's follow through, use all the mapping that was already created showing the at-risk old-growth forests and use existing information showing the critical habitat of endangered species. And don't allow silos in government. We have ongoing concerns about one government acting with one hand to protect values and with the other hand supporting business as usual. In the Ministry of Forests, for example, there are several examples, and we need to overcome this. And there's an opportunity here. The framework talks about a new office for biodiversity and ecosystem health. This is an excellent idea, and we need this as soon as possible. This could happen even before we get legislation to make sure that we have a new decision-making process to make sure that ecosystem health and biodiversity will in fact be respected. And this must overrule business as usual, particularly when it comes to logging.
We wonder if we can get this all done. We've got a provincial election planned, likely scheduled for October. Yeah, what are the chances that a lot of this gets done between now and then?
Well, the good news is that there are lots of opportunities for the BC government to get some steps in place before the election. looking at progress with old growth deferrals, the Biodiversity and Ecosystem Health Office, and a clear timeline leading to legislation, even if it's not possible before the October election.
Jens, thanks for telling us about this today. The Siera Club of BC has a great page, a web page about how to get involved and sort of an overview of how to have input into this. It's very helpful, and I'll put a link up to that and a link up to the government's documents as well, and people can step up sometime this month, take a few minutes and send in their views, can't they?
Absolutely. It's a great opportunity in this new year, and January 31st is the deadline.
Thanks for your time.